Today, I get to share with you a special experience I had on a bench in New York City. An experience I used to have every day when I lived there, but stopped having as often when I moved upstate. An experience with a sidewalk angel, a broken angel, a holy vagrant of the streets, a woman whose spirit and wisdom was recorded with her consent and desire as we spoke about powerful, private, and controversial things, strange things, things I love speaking about. Things like victim consciousness, trans women in women's spaces, forgiving narcissistic parents, and forgiving yourself. Things you can really only talk about, usually privately, on a bench. These people on the streets are often overlooked and bypassed, but they hold such powerful wisdom because they've lost everything, yet still find joy, perhaps even more joy than we do. They hold this delicate balance between no ego and ego, between no home and desiring a home, between human and spirit. They have been my teachers over the years, and today this particular woman gets to be yours. But let me explain how it came to be. I was in New York City when our plane landed after a 10-day trip to the UK. I was visiting London to scope out a potential retreat center in the northern part of the countryside, right outside of Leeds. So all of you in Europe, get ready for 2025. Long story short, I never got to see the center because our train was delayed and then cancelled. Instead, we fled London for Edinburgh in Scotland and spent 5 days there before traveling home. Scotland was magic. It was definitely somewhere I could live. It felt forgotten, timeless, and beloved by everyone there. It felt like a land we stumbled upon by mistake that no one knows exists behind the fog that surrounds it. A land that is more of a myth until it's actually experienced, and then you're walking through the landscapes of this living mythology. A giant castle overlooking the city. Most of the buildings, hundreds of years old, made of stone and impeccable as the day they were finished being built. The people are humble and kind. The city was a surprising mix of cultures. Nettles grew in plentiful bunches, and all the herbs I had been trained in were bursting from every open meadow and park. There are also native butterfly bushes growing everywhere, some from the tops of 4-story buildings and even out of graves. It was a fertile, precious landscape that I felt honored to walk upon and rest in. And then we were back in New York City, where it was hot, loud, and filled with people. No mountains, very little trees, and much less humble people. Much more big, proud, loud, and exciting, which I also love. I could feel the difference in my body, though. When we got in, I hopped out of the Uber to catch the L train in Brooklyn over to the A train and then up to St. James Theater in Times Square to see Sufjan Stevens' musical, Illinois, based on his gorgeous 2005 album that I was in love with the year after it came out. The show was incredible, inspiring, tearful, alive, and highly relatable. It follows a boy who leaves his hometown to discover his sexuality, his art, his expression, really himself, and a new way to relate to people. The big song Chicago is an infectious and euphoric anthem. The song feels like freedom every time I hear it. It was my own personal soundtrack when I left my hometown for a different lifestyle when I was 19. I went back to my hotel, fell asleep, and then woke up at 4:30 in the morning. For my body, it was 10:30 a.m. as I was still on Scottish time, so I took it as sleeping in. I got out of bed so as not to wake my wife and daughter, and went for a walk around New York City. New York City is very different in the wee hours of the morning. It's quiet, slightly dangerous, and definitely lawless. I walked by a man pissing next to his car, saw a homeless man dancing with his reflection in a mirror, traced the objects on the sidewalk and tried to tell their story in my mind about what must have happened the night before. A condom, another condom, an N95 mask, a vomit stain, and a photo of an Asian woman sleeping with googly eyes put over her face. Early morning New York City contains all the evidence of the night before because no one has cleaned up the sidewalks yet. There are no crowds of heavy feet, no beeping horns, no open shops. It is the time when the city that never sleeps is indeed asleep, or at least resting its eyes. And then I turned the corner at Cooper Square and saw her. A tall, large, voluptuous woman in a purple muumuu and a white gardening hat on the bench, staring straight into the street with the look of someone stuck in a deep meditation. At first, I thought it was Anoni, formerly Antony Hegarty, of the gorgeous musical group Antony and the Johnsons. I walked up to her and said, "Good morning," and she returned it, "Good morning," and I kept walking. She felt familiar, kindred, and sweet, but she also appeared guarded and protected, so I kept walking for another hour or so until the sun began to rise, until people began their commutes to work, and then I saw her again on the corner of St. Mark's and 2nd, asking for money. She asked me for money, and I had none. I told her what market to go to for possible food, and she shirked me off with a snarky yet clear and authoritative boundary. So I told myself, if I see her again, I'm going to get her breakfast somewhere. And don't you know, 20 minutes later, I came upon her sitting on a stoop, surrendering to her hunger and lack of funds. I sat with her, bought her watermelon slices and tea, and we dove into a beautiful conversation of laughter and tears and philosophy. Her name is Kelly Ann, but her new name is Learning, because it is her intention in this lifetime to, as she says, transcend victim consciousness. She's a trans woman who came back to New York City 3 months ago from Chicago. Interesting, given the Sufjan Stevens song I've been listening to on repeat is called Chicago. We parted ways, and the next morning I saw her again. This time she said she would happily be recorded for my podcast, and so we had a deeply personal conversation. Some things are harsh that you'll hear. Some things are controversial, especially around her beliefs, and some of mine. Keep in mind, she's a 58-year-old trans woman living on the street. I gave her enough money to eat for the next 2 weeks, possibly longer. I gave her hugs. I gave her my heart and my attention, and she gave me a lot of wisdom and was generous enough to let me record it for you here. During certain parts of this interview, I'll cut out to chime in with some things I want to say. I wanted to say them in the moment, but I was very hypnotized by her beautiful blue eyes, her tender presence, and her 5 o'clock shadow. She entranced me. I've had thousands of hours of conversations like this with sidewalk angels. Broken angels, I like to call them, not because they're damaged, but because they're broken open in a way that makes it hard for them to conform into the civilized rules of society. They are beyond, and in Indian cultures and Buddhist cultures, they would be seen as sadhus, bodhisattvas, and holy vagrants. Instead, they live here with blistered feet, cellulitis, violence, and drug addiction. Kellyanne was not on drugs. She was incredibly lucid. She even said herself, too lucid, that's the problem. And so I'm thrilled to invite you onto a bench with me in the dark morning in New York City to witness a personal and private conversation that we get to share with you. You don't have to be queer or trans or anything to get something from this conversation. Just imagine you're with us and see where it takes you inside yourself.
So I'm curious, when you were going through all of this with the hormonal uproar, and it's a XXY issue. Am I correct?
Mine's hormonal, so we haven't actually rolled out chromosomes. It could be XXY. The doctors don't know what causes my estrogen dominance.
Okay.
But it's been categorized as an intersex condition because of that.
Interesting. Was it at the time?
No.
Okay.
At the time, they had their story at the time was that I was overwhelmed by hormones from my mother's body, and that I was going to just kind of magically become like fully male, and my breasts were gonna like melt off when I hit puberty. And it was this amazing story.
This is the doctors.
These are the doctors, and I was kind of like hoping and praying for that.
Right.
And it never happened.
Right. And what era was that?
It was
80s?
No, yeah, I was born in the late 80s. So the late 80s is when they discovered it when I was born. They did tests.
So it was evident to them.
It was evident.
So this is
I had
something...
tiny breast buds at birth.
This is something we can't, dispute.
No.
Because as transgender, some of us, including myself, and I don't like admitting this, my God, I've submitted to a podcast and I'm admitting to, fibbery. And why we do it, I don't know. I know others have, but I have to talk about me.
Yeah.
I've said that I was intersexed because I wanted it to be something so definitive.
One thing I loved about Kellyanne was her humility and honesty, especially when it went against her own character, sense of self, and ego. I really respected her saying this because so many modern queer and even trans people have appropriated the intersex experience as an identity and as proof that queerness and gender fluidity exist and that sex is not binary. But it is. Sex is binary for 98% of you listening. I just wrote recently about this and I'm going to read it to you now. I wrote, I'm intersex, and my condition is constantly being brought up in many debates surrounding gender theory, so I wanted to give my opinion as an actual intersex person. Doctors do not assign someone their sex at birth. Nature does. Your mother's body does. The earth, the ancestors, and forces beyond our knowing do. This is my belief, take it or leave it. Sex is somatic, biological, and deeply interwoven and cosmically related to the binary forces of masculine and feminine. Universal forces that every creature from a planet to a tree possesses, beyond the constructs of gender roles and sexist narratives. There's a very small portion of the population, less than 2%, that are born sexually ambiguous, meaning their masculine and feminine energies have manifested biologically into one body at once. Beautiful bodies that were thrust into this typical binary sex experience only to flip the script by their very nature, not their choice. Beautiful bodies like mine that are dominated by sex hormones, opposite of their genitalia. Bodies who are born with ambiguous genitalia. Bodies that appear feminine or female with hidden testes. It is these beautiful bodies and only these that are assigned male or female at birth to assimilate us into the typical binary body. An assignment that comes from a society that lacks the capacity for ambiguity, for waiting, and for supporting the mysterious. I'm friends with non-binary and trans people. I support and respect them. Trans men taught me how to be a man. They were my compass for masculinity when I didn't have one, after I got top surgery. Being trans or non-binary doesn't mean you're incorrectly assigned to sex at birth. It means you don't relate to the natural sex you were born into. And I'm not discounting that. However, when we repeat the statement of being assigned a sex at birth, we both appropriate the intersex experience and assert the notion that humans invented sex. For someone like me who bows to nature as my creator, I just can't get with that. No one needs to use the intersex experience to validate their own. You are valid because you exist. And that's what I loved about Kellyanne saying, I said that because I wanted to be definitive. When we can't exist in a certain way or we don't understand ourselves, we often use other people's experience to get a sense of who we are or to prove validity of our existence and experience. It takes a lot of courage to admit that, and it takes a lot of self-love to be as you are without the proof or explanation.
When we use the word dysphoria, and it's a powerful, applicable word in this realm, it's about it implies delusional and mistaken or something like that. If somebody is anorexic, it implies that when you look in the mirror, you see what's not there.
Correct.
And people don't give them food, or they don't give them, enemas. Go ahead. Go. Yeah, you're fat. You can. Yeah. You're a skeleton. Go ahead. Here's some enema equipment or laxatives. Indulge yourself. We don't see you that way. That's not how you appear to the world.
This is part of what, when we were talking yesterday about the modern queer experience, and I was saying there's things at it that give me a rub and there's things that I adore. I guess part of the rub is it becomes so political, where for me it's so spiritual. And so when you say about the delusional element, to me that's a spiritual experience of I see something that no one else does. Right? Even schizophrenia I see as like a spiritual experience. It gets over pathologized.
That's a new thing that people are talking about schizophrenia. That people, people have talked about it for years, but more concentrated in this realm of academics. So it's kind of like 400 years ago, philosophers were debating if women had souls, for heaven's sakes.
Yeah.
So we're getting to the truth slowly. We're developing.
How did you start relating to yourself? How did you start relating to your dysphoria and your transness as true for you instead of just a delusion?
I want to be clear here. I don't take dysphoria or schizophrenia lightly, but I've always had an internal rub when it comes to these things simply being mental illness. I think there's so little clinical understanding of the relationship between our vast consciousness and the way that consciousness comes through the brain and perceives this shared reality. I've been part of teams of psychiatrists and doctors working with people who had extreme dissociative identity disorder and schizophrenia. They are incredibly debilitating conditions, and there is an undeniable spiritual quality to the experiences for me. It's like someone is going into another realm. Having suffered with gender dysphoria myself, I know this feeling. It's like being gaslit by your own body. It's cruel, confusing, and beyond overwhelming because you cannot just run from your own body. I remember when I interviewed Buck Angel, America's arguably oldest, most successful trans man, and the first ever to do pornography. And I told him I disagreed with calling gender dysphoria a mental illness. And he said to me,
if we don't keep it as a disorder, it will get lost. No insurance will pay for anything. People will have to pay for everything out of pocket, which is what I had to do 30 years ago. And it's not easy. That causes a lot of dysphoria. That causes a lot of anguish. That causes suicide. And so if you have your insurance company saying, oh, I'll pay for your top surgery, your hormone, oh my God, it just makes your transition go so much smoother. So I'm only saying the mental disorder, first off, because it has helped me.
Yeah.
It's like if you get diagnosed with diabetes, all of a sudden you understand why you haven't been feeling good for this whole time.
And I got it. In this world of the physical ideas and bureaucracies and concepts, we need certain identities to help us navigate our strange experience and support them. In this case, with medicine and surgeries. So I've learned to walk this space with a new fluidity. I can honor the spiritual somatic experience while also honoring how it lands in our sense of reality and how it affects someone's mental health. And it probably goes without saying, but it's very easy to conflate things when you listen to someone speak about their opinions. I'm in no way correlating being delusional or schizophrenic with dysphoria. I've had gender dysphoria. I'm saying these experiences where we perceive a different reality or we experience reality as different from other people, I see having a spiritual element as well as a mental and physical one.
It was like you were gay or you were straight, and drag queens and the people who were in that realm, that was a fringe realm. So I was put off because I saw street personalities, people who were in the sex business out there with what was said to be Crisco pumped into their faces, prostituting. And you didn't want to be that person where the skin was drooping down and you could see the red of their eyes. So when I got to New York at the Gay Community Center on 13th Street, I found a group, and it was called STA, Survivors of Transsexuals Anonymous. And there I found common sense ideas. Women come in all shapes and sizes. So when you went in there, it wasn't this polarizing concept of passing.
I want to pause here just to tell you, if you're not aware, passing is a term for trans people who go to many lengths to pass or look like the sex they identify with, the sex that is opposite of their birth sex specifically. Passing is a difficult experience because not everyone has access to the facial surgeries, the hormone therapy, or other sex-changing operations that allow them to pass in society. So many people who are genuinely afflicted with gender dysphoria can only wear women's clothing with a 5 o'clock shadow, let's say. And they find solace in these spaces with other people who have the same challenge. This is where I see the condition as the spirit not feeling congruent with the body.
The idea of passing was, and they didn't realize what good they were doing for themselves. We weren't even talking about passing. I went in there feeling like, I'm 5'11" and I have, size 10 feet. And I didn't realize my hands were big. I still look at them but people have told me recently my hands are big. They're big.
They didn't look big until I put my hand over
whatever.
yours.
Exactly.
You hold them in this way. They seem kind of dainty and sweet.
But I had learned that I wasn't. That wasn't an issue. It was the concept that was being espoused, almost like a mantra. It's not what's happening between your legs. So you were exempt. Oh, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Another pass. It's what's going on between your ears. And I think, of course, it's more about the soul, because the brain can be manipulated.
Absolutely.
It's a mechanical thing, and the heart is something. It's an essence that makes us human.
When I met Kellyanne, she told me, with her blistered feet and tired body, that she believes in transcending victim consciousness. This isn't new for me. Many homeless people tell me this, and I'm always moved by it as I share a similar viewpoint. Yet, when someone like me talks about not being a victim out loud, people might say, easy for you, you're privileged. So I wanted everyone to hear it from her, and to consider how you could be on the streets with nothing, not even having your full health, money, shelter, safety, and still devote yourself to transcending victim consciousness. It's something that she and many people have told me in this situation.
I'm recording this only because you said you were open to it. It's exciting to me that you're willing to record this.
Yes.
Because I told you yesterday that when I meet people on the street, I see them as really holy beings. I don't try to put people up on a pedestal, but I see them as that. I see you as that. Because the people like you have been attracted to sit with and spend time with and learn from, who are living on the streets, who have nothing, you're the ones that always tell me that some of your daily practices, some of the thing that drives you is transcending victim consciousness. And I want people to hear that, because it's someone on the street that says, I won't be a victim. And I think it's very powerful. And it's what helps me feel like a relative with you. That's in my work too. So what's that like for you?
Well, it's not necessarily something that is hinged on being homeless.
Correct.
So parts of it are, this victim consciousness is elemental in what I also told you yesterday is a journey through the dark night of the soul. It's about confronting culture, because you can't do this work without defying culture. And is it Terence McKenna said, culture is our operating system. And when you get into the wires and workings of all of that and you start moving it around, and that's what a lot of people who are on the fringe are doing. Now, they're not doing it necessarily with a spiritual intention. But it's the dark night of the soul is a very powerful thing. I think it's a Jungian concept. It's something I'm very interested in. I don't know a lot. I often have half information. But things will start falling apart. Things will get worse when you go on this journey. And it's in the realms of your concept around schizophrenia. Many times, maybe that's what's happening with some of these people,
Well, another thing about you that really softened my heart was your yesterday, 2 times you apologized to me. You said, I need to apologize that I forget the way you said it, but essentially judged me.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
But the way you kind of held yourself, the way you sat up straight, looked me deep in the eyes, and said, I must apologize. I felt this about you, I felt this about you, and I was wrong.
When I spoke to my mother recently, and it's a very sad thing with me and my mom, being a Cancerian especially, I'm very, very bonded to her. She said to me straight away, and I call it the birth name, I don't call it the dead name.
In recent years, this concept of dead naming has become much more popular amongst trans and non binary people. Dead naming is when you call someone by the name they were born with, the name that often is connected to their birth sex, rather than the name they choose during or after their transition. I don't resonate with the term dead naming. I don't like to give people an idea that their old self should be killed off. I don't even like the idea of killing the ego, which I've heard many times. I'm more into loving the ego. Our past selves and those parts, they still live inside of us. They're part of us. And I've found that those who are trans the longest and seem to be really comfortable with themselves are not triggered by their pre-trans names or bodies, memories or selves, as they have integrated those parts. And Kellyanne, especially toward the end, really expresses a beautiful practice for how she holds her boy self. And again, in my experience, the people who transition and who seem to be very happy and very balanced and very secure and comfortable in themselves have learned to integrate their birth sex into their transitioning sex, or into the sex they now live with and identify with. So this is not to say that, someone shouldn't dead name. It's my opinion and my experience that those who integrate their full selves, including the parts they weren't comfortable with or they didn't like, tend to have a much better outcome of happiness and personal security within themselves. And this goes for everyone, not just people who are trans. I find anyone who integrates their full self lives a much more fulfilling, peaceful life.
There's a powerful reason why. She said, Donnie, I never bonded with you, and I gave up on you a long time ago. At the end of our 2-hour conversation, I went back and I said, Mom, thank you for being... That was so revealing. That was so powerful.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful to you. It hurts.
But it was true.
It's a harsh truth.
She gave
it
to you.
Exactly. And then she turned around and she said, I never said that. And this is so typical of this very toxic 20 years of therapy. Every therapist says your parents are narcissistic and add on something else. And I resist that. They have no right to diagnose or falsely empower me through a reckless diagnosis like that. But I asked her in the course of that 2-hour conversation, she said, like she's done her whole life with me, my whole life with me, Donnie, what do you want? What do you want? I said, Mom, there's a room between us. And it's filled with garbage to the ceiling. I want to get rid of that garbage. I want to work with you in the most respectful way that gives you every advantage to get rid of that garbage. And if you don't want to, that's okay too.
I believe that certain people don't have the capacity in this lifetime to work through the garbage. They just don't. Other people do. And so when you say, hey, Mom, I want to work through this, she says, nope, don't want to. How do you work through it without her help? What's that look like?
That's a real obstacle when you're working with victim consciousness.
That's right.
It's huge. It's absolutely huge. And I had a revelation in the course of, I called her up after 20 years. And it was COVID that prompted me. And living in my hometown of Chicago, it made it more poignant. That she's living, basically 30 minutes away in a suburb. She's very accessible. I could knock on her door anytime.
Yeah.
Well, I could.
What's she gonna get? I'm gonna the door.
And she's a retired police dispatcher, so
Yeah.
But she doesn't seem to. She doesn't seem to be melded into the culture so much. My mom, in my opinion, is a kind of a loner. But the revelation was for both my father and my mother, because I spent during COVID. I felt like I was in a beautiful gilded cage. I had a really terrific apartment. I had almost everything I wanted, really, for the first time in my life, and I'm talking materialistically. But I was alone. I was isolated, and so I had time to meditate on these things. And it was hurting. It was a lot of pain. It was a lot of loneliness, lots of vivid pain by way of abandonment. Well, these were the things I was telling myself. This was the story. This was the tape I put in of how I was going to go about my life for that day.
Yeah.
To absolutely entertain and cook a 12-course meal and sit down, victim consciousness, and let's have a feast and cry for hours on end, which I can do. So the revelation was, we are here today, or how many days of yesterday, and we are exactly the best that we... Now this sounds like hokey stuff, man. It sounds so pathetically simple. We're the best that we can be. If we could do better, we would do better.
So this moment here with Kellyanne, this really lights me up. And this is how we honor the capacity of others. This is how we let people off the hook in our minds and our bodies, and how we let ourselves off the hook of grasping for them to be different. The hook is all of our expectations of how others should be, how others should meet a need of ours they cannot meet or they don't want to meet. The hook of judging others deeply, the hook of using the dopamine hit of I'm better than you because you seem less than, or you are incapable of doing something that I can do or that I want. Instead, it's quite simple. They don't have the capacity. And when she says this here, it reminds me of my personal experiences with my parents and people in my family, where I took them out of the archetype of the mother or father, and I saw them as a human. And when I could see them that way, I had less expectations on them. I was able to truly understand where they were able to show up and where they weren't. And I let them show up, happily so, where they're able to, and I don't push where they don't. And I find that to be a somatic practice for forgiveness, because my body releases the expectations I have of you, and I meet you where you are, and in that meeting, based on capacity, we can resonate and connect in a way that's congruent.
There's nothing that would have stopped my mother from doing one thing or the other. We don't have to really call it good or bad. The Buddhists don't think like that, and that's a part of my inspiration as well. I don't know all the concepts, and it's not a religious pursuit for me.
How does that change your heart when you realize if she could do better, she would, versus she's bad? How does that change your
it's
heart?
a phenomenal thing. We had the discussion about my absolute disdain and fear of becoming a narcissist, which I was for a long time. I mean, which I think a lot of 20-year-olds, teen 20s, and there are some phenomenal enlightened ones too, so it's not necessarily a rite of passage, to have to be a narcissist, but you're given a tremendous opportunity with your biological stuff that's going on that you have no control of, and the world and people like Madonna telling you, show the world everything, and you're beautiful no matter what, but it's a different kind. It's not a healthy self-love. You get to exempt yourself from a whole lot of stuff too.
Yeah.
And I had that revelation originally for myself in the late 90s when I was objectifying myself, and I had to reason it. And somewhere I was reading about this mother who was saying that she was doing automatic writing from her her son who had killed himself. And the message he gave her was this concept. I'm paraphrasing because I don't want to misquote. Mm-hmm. And I said, oh, wow, but it felt like it tasted, it like, when you hear a bell ring, I can't report to you AF or FG or whatever, but there are things and we know instinctually, and it wakes up And I believe that we come here with knowledge, and I do believe in I think I believe in reincarnation. There's not too much I believe in.
How does it change
Everything
your
is
heart?
questionable for me, huh?
How does it change your heart when you realize she did the best she could do?
Gives me an element of self-forgiveness. I mean, more of an opportunity, because, we spoke about that stuff yesterday, too. And self-loathing is a huge obstacle. It's a huge obstacle. When in the period that you had been dealing with, the fat deposits on you as female, were you conscious when you were conscious of those things and struggling or trying to manage it or regulate it? What was your sexuality in the course of that? I thought it would be interesting to know, because you have daughter, you have partner is
wife.
the preferred.
Yeah.
Okay, I like wife too. I'm a bit of a traditionalist.
You are.
Yeah, a bit.
So this is what happened. First of all, I've always been bisexual through and through. So
You've been
bisexual through and through my whole life. So that's my sexuality has always been
That's
that.
awesome. I hate that word for it though.
What?
Bisexual.
Well,
I know it's a practical
I
word.
like the word fully sexual.
So this term fully sexual I first read in a book called The Dice Man, where a man who is very bored and depressed and shut down in his life and stuck in his ego and patterns decides to live based on what a dice tells him to do. He writes down lists of unimaginable things that are the complete opposite of his morals and sexuality and values and preferences. And when he rolls the dice, whatever number he gets, he does the thing. And one of the numbers was to make love with a man. And I remember in the book, he said after doing it that he didn't feel bisexual, but that he felt fully sexual. And I've loved that ever since, because his sexuality didn't have boundaries. It went wherever it was going to go. And that's how I've always experienced mine.
To me, it's like I don't have any identity around sexuality.
Uh-huh.
So it's like a drag to even say bisexual. To me, it's like it just comes where it comes to the person it comes to. So I don't have many leanings.
And that's you tampering with the operating system. That's
right.
fabulous.
That's exactly right.
And that's what people are doing. Oh, forgive me. I don't know what I've gotten in trouble for.
Those of you that can't see us, Kellyanne just touched my shoulder, but I don't care. Pushed it lovingly, like in Elaine Bennett, Jerry
like a
Seinfeld.
grandmother's
like
nudging.
Yeah, grandmother
Okay,
nudging.
because that's where it comes from with
But
me,
it felt
my
good.
Italian.
It felt like
Right,
family.
Right, because what I'm doing is I'm letting you know, if I have to say something harsh, this is, it's a soothing.
It's soothing the harshness.
It's a heads up, like kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Now I kind of forgot what I was going to say.
Well, let me answer what you were saying, and you can bring it back in if you need to. Like when I saw you, I thought you were Anoni, which is this amazing singer, songwriter, musician, formerly known as Anthony Hegarty, Anthony and the Johnsons, one of my favorite bands. And I thought, oh, there she is. And so the first thing I did, you're absolutely right, I circled you like a shark. I thought, is this a noni at 4:30 in the morning at Cooper Square, sitting on a bench?
Was I obviously homeless to you?
No.
Okay.
And then I came over, and that's when I looked you straight in the eyes. I said, good morning. You said, good morning. You were a little guarded. And so I kept moving.
Well, because your eyes were bulging. You looked like you were on the prowl. Your tongue was on your foot. No, I'm teasing.
It's so funny you say this though, because I've publicly
was a
spoken
total-
about how I often avert my eyes from people because I truly have so much love in my eyes toward people that I'm afraid to scare them with it.
Right.
So
Now,
that's validating
see,
for you to say.
but no, that is because people like you and I are on all the time.
That's right.
We don't regulate. We're totally analyzing and assessing, not just people. But now I'm including you because I don't know you to really say this, but it sounds like it's something that I do, and it's about being on all the time. And when you're looking for somebody's eyes, which is again against the culture, against the operating system, it is what it is. We're always working with this primal stuff we're hardwired to do, and I think it's important for us to have forgiveness.
Well, when you said on
and
all the time,
understanding,
I just wanted to clarify.
awareness.
For me, there's this. My heart feels on all the time. So when I'm around a person, I can't pretend I don't care about that person.
Right.
Even the worst, quote, worst person in the world, they're human to me. They were once a child to me. So there's this immediate heart connection with almost everyone.
It's a huge absolute.
It is for me.
Yeah.
And so when I saw you, I didn't only, I have discernment. I can see someone and realize, wow, I feel for them and I'm not going to sit near them. I feel for them. It's not safe to talk to them. And you pulled me in. I felt my heart open when I saw you. I saw a kindred spirit. And then when you were a bit guarded, I kept walking. Mm-hmm. And then I went for a nice big walk around the East Village, which I love to do as the sun's rising because it's so quiet.
How could
special.
you take a big walk? Because you weren't that far. You didn't come.
It was like a half hour.
Oh, wait a minute. You mean in that...
The second meeting.
Oh, okay.
Because then I remember I saw you here on this bench.
Right.
And then I walked that way. I went for a long walk. And then I started coming up the street.
Didn't you kind of reapproach me and then I was shunning you? Because
yes.
I felt like, I didn't know. I thought you were trying to, in my script, in my assessment. Because remember, you have been housed and you've been safe. And part of my story, which is really a huge part of my story, because when I was 17, I was put out into the street unceremoniously, Catholic, Italian, Polish family. You could poison the rest of the family is how they see it.
That's right.
It's so I had to come to terms.
Was that because at the time being gay, trans, what was the thing at the time at 17?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And I was very womanly, very.
You still are. I told you yesterday.
Well, I don't know. But, of course, the world didn't interpret it. It was just a flaming queen,
Correct.
And, again, when we see people, and this is kind of another esoteric area, there's something so telling, and it has to be a part of the story to find out and understand how people come to life fully personalitied. And all these gesturings, and how could it be through eons that almost, like we were talking about I proposed the idea of recycled archetypes.
Yeah.
This is part of that. So if there are gay or trans or whatever people who are acting, or macho or femme or cis people, these are things that the personality, it's an invisible... You animate the body, of course, but it's like the nose on your face. You're born with it. It kind of changes shape as you, like the nose and the ears and things like that. Those things change shape as we go along, but they're there, and they're hardwired to manifest.
Yes, that's right.
And so it seems like there's this esoteric thing that we haven't figured out yet. And could that be something linked to reincarnation? And
but when my archetype, the one that you projected onto me, broke, what was that like for you? If I'm given an opportunity to wake up and take the garbage out, I'm there.
I really love this moment, and this is one of the moments I loved the most with Kellyanne. Not even during this interview, but when we met earlier before, or the day before. Because I actually recorded her the day after I've met her. And what I loved was how she had a really clear story of me. Like when she says recycled archetypes, all of our stories, all of our archetypes, all of our projections on other people are recycled. There's something that's existed before. It's very rare that it's something new. And so I find that important because when I see you and I have a story about you, that story is not very unique. It's not that interesting. It's not that original. And it has very little to do with you, usually, and a lot to do with me. So her archetype, her story of me being some drugged out guy looking to get laid and scoping the scene was her story based on what she's experienced. And when she said, any opportunity I have to take the garbage out, I will. That's a beautiful phrase to express the uncoupling that happened here. Because when you see someone and you judge them, or you have bias or even prejudice towards somebody, the root of that is an overcoupling. It's an association, a somatic, subconscious story of the person. And when you can consciously realize you're projecting that onto someone and you let them be something else outside of your archetype you assigned them, you're taking out the garbage, right? You're removing what blocks you from connecting to them. And that takes a lot of humility. So I really appreciated that part about her. Let's go back in.
Well, that's why this question came up originally. Because you talked about me, bulging eyes, connected. That's how it was in that moment. You were so
maybe
connected.
You were tweaking a little bit. You've got all kinds of.
I love to hear how I'm
cast of
seen.
characters here.
I love to hear how I'm seen. But the way you said, because just to let people know listening, I went for that walk, that I intersected with you again. And you were asking a woman for money.
Right.
And she just kept walking, and that's when I knew you were homeless. When I heard you asking for money, and that's when I went up to you.
No, I asked you. No. That I remember. I asked you. That's how we sparked a conversation.
You asked the woman in front of me, and then you looked to me, and you asked them, said, "I'm sorry, I don't have any cash, but you can go to the store over there. You might be able to get something." And you gave me the snarky remark. And you pushed me along my way.
Well, we're sitting where we met. And I thought we had some small aspects of. I thought because I jump right into it if I see a person. I'm just I have my automated.
But you didn't ask me here.
I was pretty sure that
I
did.
You just said good morning.
Oh.
You asked me at the second place because that's why I didn't consider you to be homeless. I thought, oh, she's just having a nice morning. And then when I heard you ask the woman in front of me, and then you asked me, that's when I realized, oh, she's on the street. She needs some, support. Mm-hmm. And I walked to the hotel I was staying at to go to the bathroom, and I said to myself, if I see her again for the third time, I'm taking her to the corner store and buying breakfast, and we're gonna hang out. And then I saw you again.
And I was still trepidatious about, I thought you were trying to patch something up with me, I didn't understand because I'm very defensive out here.
Oh, you have to be.
There's so much strangeness.
Yeah.
And there are some feminists out there, some radical feminists. And this gets dangerous, I don't think I should really go on the record. But, I have to be authentic. And it can't be, about soothing people's, or feeding people's whatever. It's not about being popular for me. It's not about being chronically oppositional either. Remember, I have that Libra moon and rising.
Yeah.
So actually, Libras are more confrontational than people attribute to them. But people like, what's her name right now? The female eunuch. What's her name? She's a very unpopular person with trans people. She said almost 10 years ago now, she gave an interview with the BBC, and I thought it was powerful. Again, this is somebody who's really has the power, or excuse me, who is so unabashed about speaking their truth that they know they have to say ugly things, unpopular things, and she looks really craggy. And she says that she said she was annoyed at the trend of culture saying that trans women are women.
I wanted to further express and explain why I agree with Kellyanne here. I've spoken about this with my trans friends and my female friends. It's a very controversial opinion because a lot of people overcouple the thought of trans women aren't biological women as some kind of transphobia or hatred. That's not where I'm coming from at all. I'm coming from a very simple opinion that a trans woman is a trans woman and a woman is a woman. And I come to that place from a sense of somatics and the honor of the initiation both people have to go through that are very different. Women, for example, are initiated into their bodies by nature, and most of them carry the burden and blessing of periods, the ability to get pregnant, and existing in a culture under or within the male gaze. There's a certain biology to that, a certain somatic experience when you're initiated with estrogen and you go through puberty and your body shifts in the way people look at you and treat you. I know that from being intersex when I was developing breasts and hips, how hypervigilant I had to become in the male gaze amongst my friends even that didn't even treat me that way before I started developing breasts. Whereas trans women, they don't have this experience. They've been socialized as boys. They've been born into male bodies. They have a feeling of abandoned and betrayal from their body, let's say. They feel completely gaslit by their bodies, as I have. They have to invoke the feminine spiritually, medically, and hormonally to attain the physical state and sex that matches their spirit and how they feel and how they want to look and live. Those are two different experiences. Wanting to invoke the feminine because your spirit and identity are at odds with your body is different from being born into the feminine and unfolding from that place. Both have challenges, both have wisdoms, but to conflate the two, in my opinion, doesn't offer support to women or trans women. Understanding and honoring the two and both and how they're different and how they're important does. It's from there that we can support one another and figure out how to coexist in a way that feels safe for everyone, rather than prioritizing one person above the other. So I believe trans women are trans women, and that women are women. And that, for me, does not take away anything from either side. It helps me understand what they both go through and how I can respect their individual, unique experiences.
There's a trans advocate in Seattle, who says the same thing. And I think women are women. They are biologically defined. Their space should be protected. They have been annexed by all variations of male entities through the ages. Like I had said earlier about, women having souls. Philosophers 400 years ago. It's a very short time period in human history. And it's not that I'm taking anything away from trans women. I want to empower trans folks, women, whoever they are, trans, to have the wherewithal to come together amongst themselves, to create our own space and not take.
I'm so with you on that.
And then we have the integrity of women.
That's right. Yeah. That's a beautiful way to say it.
And there are women who are going along with this kind of thing, and you can't tell somebody, I'm not going to tell somebody they're wrong. Please, I have to preface this. That's really clear. Speaking this concept is not a sales pitch.
No.
It is my belief.
It's yours. It's mine too.
And
it's mine too. I want to say very clearly to you, I'm with you. As someone who's intersex and completely intimately understands dysphoria and the health from that and sexual assault and growing up queer and on the fringe, I get it as well in my bones. And my belief is shared with your belief.
Yeah, and to be able to be in the world as I have been invited to, as an American, I'm told I have the freedom of speech, as does everybody else. Right. I'm not trying to sell concepts to people. I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. This is what I meditate on in my daily life, and how I have love for women, real love, and how they have inspired me. My fantasies about being a woman when I was 12 years old was to be pregnant. It wasn't to be Marilyn Monroe. I wanted to be a wifey. Mm-hmm. I saw this around me, and that's the kind of thing, those were the fantasies, those were the things that I wanted to fulfill for myself. And as I got a little older, it became more of an issue of the flesh.
That's right. That's right.
So it's an evolution.
You said something earlier that I wanted to say. We only have a couple minutes. There's so much I want to say to you. But you said I don't use dead name, I use birth name. And that made me very happy.
Right.
And I wanted to know, what's your philosophy on that personally?
This is my personal philosophy. Other people are
I have to just say, for people listening that don't know what we're talking about, when you are transgender and you change your name and you change your sex, you change your appearance, most people will call the name they were born with, the opposite gender name or opposite sex name, their dead name. And that's more of a new wave. The older trans people I'm friends with, they call it their birth name. So I just wanted you to tell us your philosophy on that.
Well, it's all generations that do and don't, but the trend is more of the newer generation. For me, it's creating a psychosis. This is my opinion. For me, for my learning journey, remember my spirit name is learning. I'm not sure that you introduced me. Did you give my name? Okay.
I said it once, but I can cut it out.
Right. No. I'm Kellyanne, and my spirit name, my self-appointed spirit name is learning. And so that's part of my learning journey, is to accept all parts of myself. And part of what I learned in TSA, Survivors of Transsexual Anonymous.
STA.
Yeah, STA.
You're the TSA, maybe. I like that. You're the TSA teaching. So, yeah.
Freudian. I'm not going to be an enemy of myself. I'm going to work with everything I have. And, there were trans women in that group that were, if you were thinking in a traditional way, you would say, no way on earth. They should never consider. They are this, they are that, whatever the tropes are. But you don't, it's not about, it's surviving. It's about surviving. And so loving or accepting, because, I could get away with just accepting myself today. I don't have to full on love myself. But not to have issues where I've heard friends, like I told you, I had friends who transformed themselves. They were lovely, gorgeous people. One of them hung themselves in a very ugly way and cut the throat of their dog before they did that. One person set themselves on fire. This is all very true and real. And these are people who wouldn't be friends with me because we weren't talking about the word passing. They were using words like spooking, and they didn't want to be in public with me because they felt that I gave them away. And it was heartbreaking, but in those heartbreaking moments, it was so easy for me to say, I just, I signed up for this trans journey and I didn't realize the financial. And it's not just a financial thing, because in the 90s and the 80s, you objectified yourself without question. And people got killed and people got AIDS. And psychologically, people say sex worker, I say prostitute. I say, mostly I like the word objectify. We figure it out pretty easy, because I don't really like the harshness. And I don't like the flowery sex worker. It is what it is. And those people are gone. And also there's a psychological thing around objectifying yourself. It warps your spirit a little. I mean, I think most people. Of course, there's always an exception to every rule. I work hard to avoid absolutes. This is my truth. And a friend told me, she was a loving friend, and she told me this about it. It's not something to be cavalier about. So there were, in my lifetime, there was probably a total of 3 months, if you add it all up, where I had to objectify myself. And let me just say, this is all they got from me for $100. Handwork. I was married to Joe. Well, before that, there was if I was attracted to someone, and that only happened twice. That I was genuinely attracted to someone, and it happened organically, and I wouldn't accept money from them in those cases.
Let's stay there, because one thing I'm going to pin here as we start to close is you, by calling it your birth name instead of your dead name, it's a practice of loving all the parts of yourself. Right?
It's a practice of working with what you have, and it's a part of me that I cannot kill off.
Yes, I love that.
And it's hate, and this is also often tied in hatred for the penis.
That's right.
And believe me when I tell you, I'm not fluid in that way. Let's get that straight. It's just a fact.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but I never had hatred. I never had a burning desire to cut it off or get it. I've been castrated. That served me very well. 20 years ago, I abandoned hormone therapy because it was deleterious to my mental health. So I've sacrificed my vanity for my mental health, and it wasn't a panacea. I still struggle.
Yeah.
And if you took my hormone levels today, I was told that I have no detectable hormones of either gender. So what that means, I don't know. It doesn't sound good to me. The body needs things to operate. Yeah. So when we deplete one thing, something else malfunctions, and I hope that's not the case.
Kellyanne, I just want to tell everybody on the record how much I adore you.
The follow-up will determine.
What does that mean?
You see, I'm a bit cynical, because we're out here in the world and people say stuff all the time. And that's part of that so-called sex worker prostitute mentality, which you have to have that bravado about you. And you have to be really clear about boundaries and how things are going to work. If you're not in charge, they are, and you can get hurt. So I brought that into the world with me, parts of that. Yeah. And so that's when, in dealing with Joe and his addiction, it withered away a lot of my naivete, my femininity. Yeah. And of course now I get misgendered because I love bringing my lower registers to life to say stop to someone.
Yeah. That's right.
And then I'm evoking my grandmother. Now she didn't lower her register. She was she was more screechy. But she was a little 4'8" Italian woman shaped like a Weber kettle. God bless her. I love her very much. But she emasculated my grandfather. And it was very hurtful to when I look back on it. When you look back and then you understand life and you understand concepts of what's good and what's bad. And it just broke my heart, because he was a strong man,
Well, I want to tell you directly so you can hear.
Yeah.
I'm not just saying I adore you as a word, I adore you. I'm saying when I saw you yesterday on the bench, right here where we're sitting, I immediately saw someone that I knew was family. And I didn't know how to break through your protective barrier. And I didn't try. I wasn't going to force anything. I kept being shown you in the morning, 3 times in a row, and the third time was the charm. And then sitting with you has confirmed everything I was feeling, which is the philosophies, the way you see the world, the way you move through the world, the way you relate to your body, the way you relate to Donnie, the way you relate to Kellyanne, and you're a witnesser instead of being fully identified all the time. And that's what lights me up about you.
Can I tell you, it's important. I have moments with Donnie every day. This is a new thing for me. And when I want to fantasize about being a mom and there being a child at my knee, grabbing my knee, it's Donnie.
This moment possibly was the most profound one for me, especially for a trans woman who dreamt of being pregnant as a little boy, wanting to grow up into a girl, as so many trans women do. And here she gets to be the mother of her own boy self. This is why the dead naming concepts, the ideology of denying biological sex, and the blanket statement that trans women are women just doesn't sit with me very well. It just doesn't feel true or helpful to a person. Whereas this resilience, this self-love that Kellyanne has discovered, even in her state of homelessness and health challenges, is a testament to, as she says, working with what you got. There's a humility of how I'm born into this body and a humility of what's my capacity to relate to this body. And this goes for everyone, regardless of being trans or straight or gay or queer, whatever you identify as. How do you relate to your body? How do you relate to the young parts that still live in you, especially the young parts that weren't parented very kindly, the young parts that weren't given a lot of holding or love or understanding? We have this really interesting power and agency and ability to hold parts of ourselves that someone else didn't know how to hold. And that's important to me. That's a very special magic we get to bring to and for ourselves, creating safety for these younger parts. So when she mothers Donnie, the little boy in her, who she once was, she is almost going back into time via the body through the psychedelics of somatics to hold a part of her. She's become the mother to a part of her that wasn't able to be mothered. This is also why the trans experience is highly spiritual for me, and the political doesn't really interest me around the topic, because there are so many reasons, many I think still mysterious, why somebody is trans. And one of them I believe is generational trauma, and the way these bodies can unfurl and transform to meet needs of society and of self that maybe couldn't have been met otherwise. It takes a transformation. So I revere the trans experience through that lens. And when she says this, I see a part of her body saying, well, I'm going to become the mother for me that he didn't have, that little Donnie didn't have. And to invoke and become that woman, that feminine mother, it's very beautiful to me.
To work with the inner child.
Yeah,
it's a
reparenting.
Oh my Lord in heaven, my gosh. It's such an incredible thing, and it's something that happened automatically. It wasn't something scripted or read from a book, because I was working with traumas. You know, I don't overtalk it. It's there. It's to me, it's obvious that I went through childhood trauma. And my mother, of course, she indicts me on it. She thinks everything is made up. She won't face things that she witnessed or did herself, and that's okay. I love her as is. And so Donnie's with me on these occasions. It's not something I do regular, scheduled. It happens when it happens, when Donnie appears, and I get to mother him like I would have wanted to be mothered.
That is so beautiful to me.
Because part of my self-hatred was that if I was given the gift to have a child, that I'd be a bad mom. You know, Marilyn would often, you know, I think she was afraid of, as much as she wanted to be a mother, I think she was afraid of becoming a mother, because she would talk about things, Marilyn Monroe, she would talk about, or she was quoted as saying, you know, that she was afraid of becoming as sick as her mother had become. And I am too. That kind of sickness. I'm sick in my own way. I want to be clear. But that kind of sickness. And I have glimpsed it, because that's this dark night of the soul. When you bring those issues up, they will appear. And they did manifest. And I can't get into that right now. But so because what I did was it's not a cavalier thing. I invited myself to step into my mother's shoes. And it happened. And it was ugly. It was awful. And so how can I hate or resent a person, whoever they are? In this case, it's my mom and my dad. How can I resent them for being broken? How can I wish them to hell or suffering or anything negative? And instead have compassion, because that's in healing in giving them healing love and energy, I'm giving that to itself in the process. But I'm not doing it for that purpose, of course. And it's tricky, you know. It's kind of like, remember Operation, that game up. So it's such a pathetic visual, you know. But still, you get the idea, you know. It's to give that idea of how difficult it is to work with tweezers, to do it and do it right and not mess up, you know. But guess what? You're not going to get electrocuted. You're going to make a mistake and you're going to drop it and it's going to buzz and you'll make a mistake and you'll start again, hopefully, you know.
So now let's hop off the bench together. Let's notice what we're feeling, what we witnessed, what's coming up in your bodies. Kellyanne really helped remind me that when you go into certain parts of yourself, you feel like you're going to get electrocuted. You feel like you're going to die when you meet certain truths in certain parts, but you won't. All that dies is your fear and your story, which can be pretty painful, believe it or not. At the time of this taping, Kellyanne is still on the streets and looking for shelter and wants to find work and a room or an apartment. Anyone who feels called to support her, please feel free to email us info@holisticlifenavigation.com, and we can find a way to connect the two of you or to send your support to her. I want to thank you for sitting on this bench with me. What I learned from these benches, what I learned from sitting with people who have lost so much, is to have nothing left to lose gives you a certain courage, a certain integrity, a certain wholeness in yourself. When you've lost everything, yet you're still sitting here, yet you're still able to be open-hearted and open-minded. You're still able to eat and laugh and connect and dream. There's a certain level of resilience there that just lights me the fuck up. And I hope you felt that with me, even for a moment. I also hope you're able to witness some of these controversial opinions just as that, opinions. It seems we're in this place, I think largely from social media, where opinions and facts have become completely overcoupled, and we try to shut down people's opinions we don't agree with. But I am all about the biodiversity of thought. I thrive on it. The same way an ecosystem thrives, I believe human beings in our connection culturally and globally can thrive the more capacity we have for true diversity of thinking, diversity of beliefs, diversity of opinions. So see where Kellyanne's opinions touched something in you, annoyed something in you, shocked something in you. See where my opinions did the same. And be with that. Be with that little rupture, the little activation, that little jolt that awakened in you. That's fertility. That's something in you being fertilized and awakened. Play with it. See where it takes you. And I'll see you next time. That's the end of today's episode. Now let's take a moment to notice where we feel the episode in our bodies. Close your eyes. Take a breath. And let whatever wants to come up, come up. And remember, those sensations hold the wisdom that we're looking for. If you want to go deeper, visit holisticlifenavigation.com.